All right, so we're going to get started. Happy Halloween to all of you. We've got some entertaining costumes. My first class was clearly too asleep to have costumes, but such is life. That's right, we didn't have Daniel to smell the room up. No, no, I'm just teasing. Okay, so today we're gonna work through exercise 219. I can't talk over all of you. There we go. So we're going to work through exercise 219. It's a little bit premature because I'm guessing your buildings aren't quite ready for this, but given the number of days in the semester and where we have to go, I kind of have to lecture about this today. I wish I had more time for you guys to work to get ready for this, but it is what it is. The truth is, though, if you have a general mass of your building, you have the general kind of framework that you're going to build within, even if it's not fully developed yet, that's okay. We can still bring it into the site. We can still work with it. I have a Rhino file that is my building. This is the same building I've used several semesters in a row, so it's fairly well resolved at this point. Though typically every semester I add something to it along the way. This file I'm calling my retreat base. It is the base file that contains the geometry of my building. That's it. There's no site context. There are no lights in it. There's no sun in it. It's just the building itself and the materials associated with the building. That's it. As we go further into the semester, I will end up putting in some blocks. So like inside here in this room, I'll end up putting some furniture, for example, or in one of these rooms, I'll put some furniture and whatever. So in this file, this is where I would put in blocks if I was putting in blocks. So this is the geometry of the building, and any furniture or anything else that's going to go in it is going to show up here. This then we will use as a block reference, and we will bring that into the site itself. So today is about taking this file that you should have already been working on last class and bringing it in and getting it integrated into the site itself. Yeah? So the windows here are blocks. So I built, they're repetitive. So this window right there, I built outside in a separate file, and I've used it over and over again in the file. So these are the same, those are the same, etc. These windows in here, I built just in the file because they're not really, they're kind of different. Each one's a little bit more custom. So I didn't end up doing just one repeated. It kind of depends a little bit on how you feel like modeling it out. But either way is fine. And if you plan to reuse it and you want to add a fair amount of detail to it, that's great, because then you only build it once. In terms of like my stairs, those are just individual pieces that were built in here. There's still a few errors that I haven't corrected, like the edge of the glass railing on the upper landing here is cut off. Wouldn't meet code because you'd fall over the top of it. But there's those kinds of things that I haven't resolved. Anyway, the goal in this file is to have your materials applied, to have your texture mapping done well. You can see that I have texture mapping applied. I'm looking at this in rendered mode so that I can kind of see what the texture mapping looks like, make sure it feels appropriate, etc. Once this file's ready, I'm just going to save it. And then we're going to start with the scene itself. And this is really important because this file here is the one that you can edit and work on wherever you are. You have Rhino on your home computer. You can open it up. You can work on it. No big deal. You can save it. And it's not going to mess with any of the lights or any of the material files or whatever. This is just geometry. And then when we get into the final scene, that's where we do the renderings themselves. So I have this. The next thing that I need is I need to create the scene itself. So this is where I'm going to put my building. And so on the course website, I pulled up exercise 219. I think at the bottom of it, no, I don't have it there. You might have to go to the assignments. (205). There we go, zip file with the site information. I gave you guys this last class. I'm guessing that you probably already have it. I'm just going to make sure that it ends up in today's folder for me. All right, and so I'll go ahead and put it there. Perfect. So now, in that brand new Rhino file that I just created here, that's a large object inches, I'm going to go through the same steps that we kind of did when we first started with that topography. So another round of review on that one. I'll go into File, and then I'll go into Import. And I'm going to go to that first and there's my SketchUp files. I have the Site 1 and Site 2. The coast is Site 2. That's the one I'm going to do today, though truth be told, I should probably do Site 1 just because I haven't done that one. Actually, why don't I do Site 1? This way, it's a little bit different. You guys see me do it differently than I've done in the past. We'll go ahead and say Open. I'm just going to come in as a mesh. And when it comes in, first off, I don't need the person, so we can get rid of the person. We can look at this out in perspective. Let me go ahead and switch into shaded mode so we can see it. There's that edge for my site. My building's going to end up out there somewhere. So if I look at my layers here, I've got a bunch of nasty layers. We need to start getting organized. Remember, by the time this is done, there's going to be probably 100 to 200 layers. So being organized early is a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting organized. I'm going to create a layer called Site. Underneath that layer, I will have Google SketchUp. And I'm going to move the mesh here onto that Google SketchUp layer. I'm going to also save this flat plane. Sometimes, and I should double check this, sometimes it will include, yeah, it includes the photograph information. So I'm going to save that plane for later just in case, because I might want that photograph. So we'll call this Google plane. And I will change that layer. So those are both there on the site layers. I can ultimately turn them off. Now that I have site and these two, I'm going to go back up and get rid of all the rest of the layers. Oops. It would help if I press the delete layer button instead of the new layer button. It doesn't want to let me get rid of layer 0 because Susan still exists, even though I deleted her. So let's go into my block manager. Susan, come on. And let's get rid of Susan. There we go. And now I should be able to get rid of layer 0. And then on my site, I'm going to create another sublayer. And I'll call this contour X and Y. And I may end up deleting that one after I use it. We'll make that the active layer. Come on. There we go. And I'll get rid of the default layer there. So you see I've already condensed down my layers. I'm just trying to just create the layers as I work. OK, we'll turn off the plane. Sorry, wrong one. There we go. Now I'm going to contour this site. So I'll use my contour command. Contour base point. Remember, on my object snap, I'm going to have to turn on my vertex and knot snaps to be able to snap to the mesh. I'll also turn on ortho so I can go in the ortho direction here. We'll do it at 100 feet. Perfect. Same thing. And we'll contour from that corner again, going that way at 100 feet. I can then turn off the Google Terrain and look down right there. Need to do some trimming to get this nice and clean. Oops. No, it's going to be that one. Perfect. Trim. And I'll work my way around here. And this should be total review. We've done this enough times, I think you guys have it down. All right, so I'm now all the way around my object here. I will take this and I will do my NURBS surface. So I'll go up to surface and then choose curve network or type in network surface, network SRF. We'll build the surface. And I should have created a new layer before I did that. There we go. And let me take that surface. I'm going to rebuild it. And we'll rebuild at 100 by 100 for right now. Come on. There we go. And I'll say OK. Perfect. So I have 100 by 100. That should really be on its own layer. And I'll call that terrain. Change object layer. We'll make that active, and now we can turn off there. So I now have that nice NURBS smooth surface. If I don't like the smoothness of this ridge, for example, I could rebuild that at 50 by 50 if I wanted to. It doesn't really matter for right now. At this point, though, it's going to be about bringing my block into the site. So a couple notes about blocks. So the object of the block exists on a layer independent of all the stuff that is inside of the block. So it's always worth creating a new layer called blocks and making sure that is active before you bring in a block, because the block itself will end up on that layer. So I have that. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my block. Actually, before I do that, I should save this file. And we are in the fall of 2018. There we go. And we will call this master site. And I might as well add a fall of 2018 to keep myself a little bit organized. There it is. So now it's time to bring in that block. I'll go to my Edit menu. I'll go to Blocks, and I'll say Insert Block Instance right there. And I'm going to browse for, not my SketchUp file. We're going to look for my Rhino file. And that should be it's essentially, it's this file. And where did I save this one? Let me do a save as and make sure it goes where it's supposed to go. Let's put it in the fall. There we go. There's retreat base. Should probably add a. I have to keep track of the semester because I have lots of these versions. OK, so that's saved. We'll go back to the original file here, or the master site. We'll go into the fall of 2018. There's the retreat base. I'll say Open, and I'll say OK. Now, here comes the options. Remember, I want a link and my layer style as reference. This block is a very complex, big block. I don't want to embed it. I want to make sure it's linked so that I'm using the small version of the file. I do, however, have to make sure that I know where that file is, because it's not going to render or turn out without doing it. So there it is. And there's my little itty-bitty building. So now comes the challenge of putting it into the scene somewhere and deciding where it belongs. So I have not inserted this particular building into this site before, so I have no idea where it's going to fit quite yet. But I'll start by just getting it into the scene itself. So we'll stick it there for lack of something better. So it's kind of floating there. The way that I have this set up, I have one side like that. And actually, you know what? Let me just see this in shaded mode there for a second. This is kind of the back side of the building. So it's the opposite direction of the way I want it facing. So I'll take the whole thing and I'll rotate it. And we will rotate at least kind of around that way. And it may take some more rotations here. Yeah, I think it needs to rotate back just a little bit. I'm going to turn off ortho so I have a little bit more flexibility. There we go. And let's drop this one down. Let's move V for vertical, and I'll drop this down. You can see that it starts to intersect there. I'll have to go down some more. Too far. Starting to integrate okay. As I look at the backside, okay, we're getting there a little bit. Let me move this vertical. Let me turn off my snaps for a second. Try to drop that a little bit more. This building was designed to kind of sit back into the landscape a bit. All right, not too bad in terms of sitting on the side. Yeah, I'm okay with it. So this is now sitting in the site itself. And you notice that I gave myself some flexibility. The original file here, my base file, I gave myself a really big foundation wall underneath because I knew it was going to be on the side of the hill, so I wanted to give myself enough distance to make sure I covered it. If you found when you tried to insert it, let me go back to this. For example, things that didn't quite, like, oh, well, I didn't make that foundation long enough there, or I didn't make this wall come back far enough. Those are things that you'll go back to your original file and correct. So in this case, I didn't do that, so I need to go back to my original file. I'll jump back to here. And this wall here, I need to extend it out. So we'll go ahead and just add a box. And let's see here. Let's do it from that corner out to that corner, and we'll go down to there. I'm going to go ahead and do match properties. Oops, let me make sure nothing's selected. Match properties. That's the object I want to modify. Enter. This is the object that I like. Yeah, go ahead and match all that stuff, including putting it on the right layer. The only thing it doesn't match is the texture mapping. So we have to go back in to my texture mapping here. Sorry, I should be on this one. Match mapping to that one so that my texture mapping matches. So now that got extended out. My wall wasn't quite long enough up here, so I should probably extend that out just a little bit more. I'm just going to do a scale 1D on it. And we'll bring that out a little bit further, maybe like that. Top of the wall is a little harder to address. I probably need to build out that top a little bit more. Let me do a plane. Let's go from there to there, and we'll pull that out like that. And let me extrude surface. It should be set to solid, and we'll extrude it down. And then once again, I need to match properties to that object. And then I need to match my texture mapping. So we'll come over to texture mapping to that object as well. And now the texture mapping should match across. My original surface is still there. That's why I'm getting those artifacts. We'll get rid of that original surface there. Now I have to match properties again. There we go. Match the mapping to that so that it appears continuous. All right, that's pretty good. I'm happy by that. I'll go ahead and save that. And this is, again, the advantage of working in this file. I can work on that, jump back to my site here, and just go into my edit menu and say blocks, block manager. Linked file is newer. Go ahead and update that linked file. You usually have to wait a little bit. Perfect. Now that one's been updated. And you see that I made that longer so it intersects a little bit better. I probably should have made it a little bit longer so it actually went through. So let me jump back one more time. Apologize for that. I thought I made it long enough. Let's take this one, scale 1D. Same thing here. There we go. Now it should be long enough. And I'll go to save and jump over to this version. And once again, edit, blocks, block manager, update. Perfect. So now I have that where it actually intersects. That's a good thing. In this scenario, I have some of my hillside going through my building right there. And that's problematic. Ultimately, I'm going to need to correct that I'm going to trim out that piece of my terrain. So I'll do that by switching into the top view. And let's zoom in on my little building here. And I'm just going to draw a line around the perimeter of my building. So I'll come over and I'll use line, although sometimes it's useful to just have a temporary layer. So I'll do this and I'll rename this layer. I got to get out of my command. I'll just say construction lines. And then I'll go back to my polyline tool and I'm essentially going to trace around the outside of my building. I have to know where the walls are. I have some little overhangs. Let me turn back on my snaps. So it's actually this line, this inner line there, there. And sorry, I have to think where this one is. Turn on perpendicular here. Should be that one. Oh, come on, snap for me. All right, and then we'll come back and I'll close that. Now that line that I just created, if I look at it in 3D, it's going to be really weird. So it goes up and down and over and all around my building. It doesn't matter though, because I'm going to use the project command to get that line down onto my surface. So I'll switch back into the top view. I'll type project, and I'm going to project that line onto this surface. And again, I have to do that in the top view. And now you can see the resulting line really conveniently identifies what I can trim out of my building. Looks like I went a little too far over here and I cut out too much. So I might come back and draw a little line there, and then I'll project that one onto this surface. And between those two sets of lines, I can now go into trim, and I can trim out that part of the surface. And essentially that allowed me not to trim out this piece of the surface just yet. So the terrain no longer flows through my building. So that's a good thing. The next piece of this is this part of the terrain I'd like to modify so it flattens out in here and is retained by this little retaining wall. So I need to be able to modify part of this terrain. So it would be convenient if I knew the exact, oops, sorry, I was still in the trim command, the exact point at which this object here intersected this piece of terrain. The challenge with that, though, is if I just select this object and do an intersect, it's going to intersect everything the block intersects. And that can be a little bit too much. So sometimes you just need to give yourself a little bit of a helper object. So I'll come in here and I'm going to recreate this. Let me do this. Essentially what I just did in the other view. I'll create a new surface. I'll extrude that surface. Solid. And, sorry, delete input, yes, there we go. And so I'll remake that. I'll ultimately delete that little polysurface, but I can use that polysurface and this to do an intersect. Which gives me the point at which my wall intersects the surface, like that. So now that I have that, I can take a line and draw from this corner here over to that corner there. There's that line. I can switch into the top view and project that line onto this curved surface. There it is. And now I ought to be able to use that plus this. And I might have to use that there. There we go. To do another trim. And I can essentially trim out that piece of the surface right there. So I gave myself a line between this point on my building and this point on my wall. And you can kind of see where this is going. Essentially, I'm going to rebuild a brand new surface inside of here. So bear with me for a little bit. It takes a little bit of work to do this. I'm going to look at it from underneath. And I'm going to draw a line that goes from right here to right there and comes out to right there. Then I'm going to turn my points on that line. Oh, sorry, I should have just picked the button here. Points on. It's not giving me the point. How nice. All right, I'll have to just move it vertically. Let's go down a little bit. Like that. Then I will connect from this point to that point. So I have this line. I have this line right there. Come on. Right there. Ah. There it is. So I have three sides of my network surface. The last one is the line that goes along here that I created, that line right there, which doesn't quite, there's a little connection issue right there, which was this line there. Let me explode, and we will. Sometimes the challenge is seeing all the geometry. All right, so that plus this line here, plus this line there, plus this line there becomes my network surface. So network SRF, it builds in that little piece of material. And now I've adjusted the elevation of these two. This comes down and ends up being really flat. I could modify this a bit. I could change how it hits against the house. I could essentially create a curve along the house there and go up to that back corner and rewrap the whole thing. But you guys get the idea that I'm modifying the terrain to fit what it is that I'm drawing. So now I have that area, and I guess we could argue that this is some kind of like a grassy area. So maybe I'll put a door out here later on in the semester. This is what happens when you build this new. New things happen. So now I have this in my scene. That feels pretty good. It's time to start thinking of a little bit larger context for an exterior rendering. So I'll go ahead and save this before I get too far. Now when it comes to applying a material on this big surface here, we have to think about what kind of a material is appropriate to be going on top of this surface. We have a couple different options. One, probably the best option, would be to just Photoshop in based on a photograph when we do the rendering later on. This class doesn't teach Photoshop, so it's not something that's required. The way I like to describe it is to get your final rendering, you could spend 100% of your time in V-Ray and get a good rendering. You could spend 100% of your time in Photoshop and get a good rendering, or you could spend 50% of the time in using both. So you can cut the time down and get a good quality rendering if you use both. But like I said, we're not covering Photoshop in this class, so we're going to do a lot of work in just V-Ray. So as I start to set this up, a couple things that I can do. One, I can use the, if we switch for just a second, go into rendered mode. There we go. I could use the Google Terrain, this one, that had that kind of texture version. I could use the material from this. I could create a new material and apply that onto this surface. So I could say, let me go ahead and match properties of this object with that object. Let's see if it'll do it. There we go. And essentially, I've matched the properties from one object to the other object. I can then turn off the, oh, yeah. Sorry, it changed the layer of my terrain. So let me change object layer. I could turn it off. And now it's applying the texture file, essentially, from that Google Earth image. The problem with this is as we get in and try to do our rendering, it's really just kind of color blotches. It's not a high enough resolution to be that useful. So in this particular case, I think it's not a bad strategy to start with this. The other option would be to use a very generic kind of splotchy material. If in the coastal version, when you do the same thing, I often suggest doing the kind of grassy hill background material that is in your material library. It's basically tan and green blotches. And then when we start to set up our view, we're going to think carefully about what it is in our view that we're actually seeing, and how do we control just the right things in our object. And so as I start to set this view up, I'm going to very carefully decide what it is that I'm showing and what it is that I'm not showing. And by doing that, I'm eliminating lots of pieces that I'm not going to try to render. So I'm not going to try to render the whole hillside. I'll identify certain pieces that are good to render, and I may zoom in even a little bit further, depending on my composition, and I'll choose to concentrate my effort on rendering the rock here. Or I'll choose to flip this around and render, from this level, looking at the building. So I can carefully control what it is that I'm seeing. That being said, we still need to deal with the background. So if we were rendering any of these views, what are we looking at that's off here in the gray space? What's the horizon look like? And I have two different files to help you out. I'm going to save this as I go forward here. And they're available. If you go to today's exercise, I have some links that are listed in here for you as well. We're going to come back to the sun and skylight. I'll get to that in just a second. I have ocean, grass, rocks, and the background files for Lake Tahoe. So these are all in the landscape category. If you're doing the ocean, you're going to use the ocean backdrop. The grass we'll get to in a second. If you're doing Lake Tahoe, you're going to use the Lake Tahoe backdrop. It's not perfect as a rendering, but at least it gives you where the mountains are and that sort of thing. So you get a horizon, and that's the point. So because I'm doing this one, I'm going to go ahead and download the background texture, or excuse me, the lake surface texture. No, the updated block. Thank you. That one. This one's updated in spring of 2018, so it's a little bit better than the older version. It's downloaded. Let's go ahead and show it in the folder. There it is. I'm going to extract all of these, and we'll put it into the assignment folder that I've created. There we go. Let me go ahead and create a new folder just to keep these a little bit more organized. And we'll say Tahoe site. Never mind. Apparently I said new shortcut, not new folder. Folder. There we go. So as with any block, my recommendation is that you open these first to take a look at what they look like. So let me open the block first. All right. So there's Lake Tahoe in all its glory. It's not perfect, but it gives us a pretty good sense. I've broken this into two pieces. One piece is a little bit higher resolution than the lower piece. This is a very large file, so there's a lot to kind of consider when you're doing this kind of rendering. The ocean file is really small. It's just a dish. It's like a giant plate that you stick in for the ocean. It's not too bad. This one takes a little bit more finesse. So I have that one, and I also have the Tahoe site file here. So there's that Tahoe site file. This is similar. This ridge right there is kind of where I've placed the building so far. So let's take these and get them into my actual site. So we'll come back to this one, my master site, where I have my building already integrated. I'll go into Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And you would be if you were doing the ocean, you would be doing this with the ocean file. I'm going to bring in the site and the block eventually. We'll start with just the site, and I'll say open, and then OK. It's going to be a linked reference. I'll say OK, and we'll drop it in. I thought I did. Apparently not. Let's try that one more time. There we go. I have to do some alignment issues to make sure that this lines up with what I've already been working with. So let's take this one. Let's move it over a little bit. You know what? OK, that's there. Sometimes you just need to be able to see this a little bit more in 3D. Move this down, vertical. And moves back this way a little bit. And we're getting there. I'm getting close to where that is. Now I can also bring in, and you can see that this one is a little bit more approximate than the one I just created with my actual building on it. But then I can also bring in that bigger site file. And I do this in two pieces because I like to have the blocks to be able to turn off the big one because it's so big. So I'll go into Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance one more time. And we'll bring in the whole big thing. And there's the giant version of it. This one we will move, and it should snap right to that piece right there. And you can tell that Rhino kind of slows down and chugs a little bit once you get the whole Tahoe in. But this is going to allow me to start to set up a rendering that has mountains in it. So you can see as I start to get closer to my objects, so let's go to my block instance here, zoom, selected. You can see that I'm getting Tahoe and I'm getting the skyline there in the background, which is the whole point. So as I start to get closer, I'm going to pay attention to what it is that I'm rendering. I like sky. I like seeing those mountains in the background. I don't want to have to render too much that's up close. So something like this is a reasonable setup. I'm going to go ahead and save this view so that I can come back and re-render from here. So I'll go into Set View, Named Views. And this is going to be my perspective 1. So I'll say perspective 0, 1. And theoretically, this could be one of the final renderings that I create. It's not going to be the right one yet, because I'm going to re-render it a bunch of times. but this view could be right. Maybe I'll pan this and just adjust it ever so slightly so it's a little bit lower, so I'm not losing that corner. Let me save it one more time. We'll resave it as perspective 1. Yes. And there's my first view. Remember, you're going to end up creating multiple views, so play around with your views, but this is a good place for me to start. Now I need to bring in the HDRI background image. So I'll go to my quick rendering setups. So we'll jump over to resources. We'll go to our quick rendering setups. And I'm going to pick one of the day scenes. For the ocean people, I would suggest the Malibu overlook. No surprise, it's an ocean scene. But for Tahoe, I think I'd pick this basic day scene 1. I've already downloaded this, but I'm going to pay attention to things like the sun settings. The other thing that you can use, and that I want to tell you guys about today, is included with all of these is a visopt file that we can load in, which is really useful because it has a bunch of the settings already set for us. So I want to make sure that I right-click on this and say Save Link As, and we'll save that visopt file. I actually already do have it saved on my flash drive. It's in Resources, in V-Ray, and then in my V-Ray HDRI. This is a day HDRI, and this is Free 002. It's that one, and there, this visopt file is already saved. So I could save it there, and it would say, do you want to replace it? Sure, I'll replace it. And now it's downloaded that. So because I have that file, I still need to pay attention to the sun settings. We'll come back to the sun settings in just a second. But in Rhino, here I am in my master site. We'll do a save just in case. I'll go into V-Ray, and I'll go into my V-Ray options. And I'm going to open one of the drawers. It doesn't matter which one, but this is a way of confirming that it actually loaded in. One drawer is open. I'll click Load, and I'm going to go find that visopt file that I just saved. I'll go into Resources, V-Ray, V-Ray HDRI, and it was the day, and it was 0002, and there it is. When I say open, when it's loaded, it will close all the drawers. So it's just a way of knowing that, yes, it did load. That's perfect. So a couple of things left. In the Environment tab, the 2 maps have been assigned with the correct values, but V-Ray might not know where to find these files. So sometimes you do have to go in. Yeah, it turned pink. You saw that it was pink. It didn't know where it was. So I'll have to go into my HDRIs and tell it where that 002 HDRI was. So V-Ray, and it was this one, and this was the environment one. There it is. Say open, and OK. And then this one was the reference version. There's the reference version. Perfect. And so now those 2 have been set. That's good. Next one that I have to deal with is inserting the sun. I currently don't have my V-Ray toolbars showing, which is unfortunate. So let me load those in. Let me go to Tools, Toolbar Layout, File, and then Open. And I have it saved on my flash drive in Resources so that I can get to it quickly. There we go. And now I'm going to use my sun. And when I do my sun, I'm going to uncheck manual control. I'm going to look for what it says on my quick rendering setups. Truth be told, Carson City is closer to Tahoe, but we're still kind of in the same ballpark. So I'm just going to use the San Francisco one here. On 5/2/2016 at 2:30 p.m. with daylight savings time on. I'm going to have to reference that when I come back because I'm not going to remember all of it. So San Francisco. Five, 2016. Daylight savings time was on, and it was at 2:30 p.m. There we go. When I say OK, remember I have to actually click and put the sun in my scene. The sun won't show up when you're in rendered mode, but if you're in shaded mode, there it is. So that matches up nicely for my HDRI background. I'll go back into my V-Ray options. I'll go into my output. And I'd like to make sure that I get the exact what you see is what you get. So I'm going to unlock the viewport ratio. I'll get the aspect ratio again. Then I'll lock it just so that I'm getting exactly what I'm seeing on the screen. And we'll do a small version, 100 by 236, just to see if it renders out and if the settings are correct. So remember, you always start with that small version of the rendering. There you go, and it's not too bad. It's giving me some renderings, I'm seeing some backgrounds, etc. There may be some things that I have to tweak and adjust with the backgrounds and the rendering, but you can see that I'm starting to get in the right direction. Now, a couple other things that may be useful for you as you start to set up these views. You may decide that you want to render Grassblades in your file. You can do that using something that I have set up for you. It's again in the landscape downloads. And I know this is probably too much information for right now, but I have to tell it to you at some point, and now's the time. So under Resources and the Rhino Blocks library, I'm going to go to Landscape. This bunch grass is what I'm talking about. Essentially, it's tall grass, and it comes in. The rendering works by looking at it at an angle. So if you have layers of these together and you look through it, it will look like grass. If you look down on it from the top, it'll look like little surface arcs that don't make any sense. So you have to look at it from the side. And you can download that block and obviously the materials that are associated with it. The other thing that I have are a bunch of rocks that can be useful, and you can drop these rocks in. It sounds easier than it actually is to build rocks and make them look right. So if you want to spend some time with rocks, you can build more rocks. They have a granite texture applied to them. I have both of those already on my flash drive, so I can load those directly into a file. They would come in the same way. I go to Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I would go find, these happen to live on my flash drive in my resources folder under Rhino, Rhino Blocks, Landscape. There we go. I have bunch grass. I have the boulders, etc. So there's the boulders, link and reference, and I could drop them into the file like that. There they are. They may need to be moved a little bit. Let's move these over. Turn off my snaps. Oh, come on. And these objects could be scaled. So right now I'm seeing a very small rock pile, but I could scale them up to make a bigger rock pile, etc. The grass works the same way. I go to Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I would drop the bunch grass in. Embed and link, there we go. And I could drop it in there. Now, you see how I'm getting that weird clipping happening? That happens typically when I have the giant Tahoe block on. So that's time to kind of reset, turn that one off, get back to this, zoom selected, which will reorient. You see it's no longer clipping anymore. That's what happens when you have that big block. That's why I shrunk it down to something a little bit smaller. So there I am with my grass. We can move this over a little bit. Come on. It's just not playing nice for me right now. All right. There we go. And I will do a quick close-up rendering so you can see what this is really doing here. And then with this grass, you typically need more versions of it. So you might copy it or even array it. And so you might create several versions of it like that. And then when you go to render it, now those are on an angle, but let me get in here and render it. Oh, material wasn't applied correctly. So let me go back into my V-Ray materials. Bunch grass, I need to reload that. Of course, V-Ray is not responding, right? All right, there we go. Let me try that render one more time. So the grass tends to slow the rendering down a fair amount because it's doing the individual blades and calculating the transparency through them. So it's the kind of thing that you'll ultimately want to turn on and turn off, like turn off all the grass while you do your test renders and then turn it back on for that one final render. So I'll let this keep going for now. That essentially covers everything that we're doing today. This is the point in the semester where what I talk about doesn't necessarily match what you do today. So I give you this handout with exercise 219 that's back and front, part 1 through 6. Is it realistic that you're going to get through all of those today? Probably not. But I know how many days there are left in the semester. I know how many days I get to lecture, and I've calculated out what I need to talk about on each of those days to get to the end. These things that I talk about today may end up coming to bear in 2 weeks for you. That's okay. When you go to turn in your exercise, however, each day, turn in whatever you've done for the day. So even if it doesn't match what I want for 219, so as I say, create a rendering that's 1024 by 726 or 768 minimum and post it by the end of class today. Maybe you're not ready to do a render. Give me a screen capture of something and post that this is exercise 219. Okay, even if it doesn't match at all with what I asked you for. This is just, it's one of those things where it's difficult to have everybody at the same level consistently for the next 6 weeks of the semester. So you'll just post when you're here whatever you're working on that given day, and I'll still give you credit. My lectures will match what the exercises say. If magically you're in step with me, your life will be better because what I talk about is matching up with what I have, but it depends on how much work you do outside of class. You'll end up doing the work between now and then. It's just a matter of when. So the more caught up, there you go. You can see in the rendering now that it came through that it looks, these ones are too high. I've got to lower them back down, but it looks like grass. And when it renders, it will feel like grass, and that's the point. But you just have to make sure you're doing it from the side. I will correct those a little bit. I'll do a higher quality rendering so you can see it as a sample going forward. Okay? I know today was an awful lot to take in, but that's kind of the way life is, and so you got a lot today. Good news is everything's recorded, so you can go back and watch. This is, interestingly enough, the first time that I've ever done the Tahoe scene live with anybody. So this is good for the people that are doing the Tahoe scene. If you're doing the beach scene and you want to watch me put the ocean in, go back to last semester, that lecture, because I put the ocean in and you can see me adjust the ocean and get that one set right. Going forward, I may flip back and forth between the two scenes so you can see me make little adjustments to both, just to try to even it out and make it fair for everybody, so you see me demo. Okay? If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, do a lot of work today. Use the rest of your time wisely, no matter what that is that you're doing.